today's lesson, I'm going to show you a foolproof way to ensure that you never hit wrong notes in your solos ever again. This is a method I demonstrate in detail in my new course, The Art of Melodic Soloing. If you're ever asking yourself, what do I practice to improve my lead guitar playing? This is it. My name is Jack Ruch. Welcome to my channel. Let's get into it. So what we're going to focus on today is a little arpeggio exercise that I love to do. Now, this exercise is so effective because it eliminates all the extra notes that can get in the way and really focuses in on just the chord tones for the chords you're playing over. So the chord progression we're going to be working with today is B minor 7 to E dominant 7, then G major 7, and finally F dominant 7. Now, when we talk about seventh chords, we're talking about a 4-note chord, right? We have a basic triad, and then we're adding a 4th note on top of that. This is the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th, right? And the way you find these notes is to take a scale and play every other note of that scale. In the case of B minor 7, if we play up a B minor scale, and we just skip every other note, starting with the first note. We have B, then we play the 3rd note of the scale, which is D, then the 5th note of the scale, which is F sharp, and finally the 7th note of the scale, which is A. That gives us our root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th of a B minor 7 chord. And we can continue that on with all of the chords in the progression. For an E7, we have E, which is the root, G sharp, which is the 3rd, B, which is the 5th, and D, which is the flat 7th. And we can voice that chord a bunch of different ways up and down the fretboard. Right? And continuing on, our G major 7 is made up of G, B, D, and a major 7th, which is the note F sharp. So each one of these 7th chords has its own color and flavor and sound. And finally, our F sharp 7 chord, our dominant 7th chord, is made up of F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, and E. Right? So these are the key notes we need to know to navigate through this chord progression. So what I'm going to do now is just play the chords in this position down to the backing track so you can get a feel for the chord progression, the phrasing and pacing of it, and the groove we're going to be working over today. All right, so let's get into this arpeggio exercise. Now, the key with this kind of thing is to take it one position at a time and to play your chord voicings and find chord voicings that all fit into one position. So for this lesson, we're just going to be focusing down here around, the 2nd to 4th fret area. And you'll notice I'm playing all of these chords. There's B minor 7, there's E7, all within this basic position, this span of a few frets. There's my G major 7, and then my F sharp dominant 7. And the cool thing about this is as you practice it and expand on it, you can play these chord voicings through all kinds of different positions, right? You could play B minor 7 there, E7 there, G major 7 there, and F sharp 7, right? So you have 5 different positions up the fretboard you can work this stuff out. And that's something I go into detail and really demonstrate over a bunch of different chord progressions in my course that I did called Art of Melodic Soloing. But for today, I'm just gonna give you a little introduction into this exercise. So basically, like we discussed before, we've got these 4-note chords and we've got the notes that make up these chords. So really all we have to do now is lay them out in order in this position according to these chord voicings. So if we start with B minor 7, we have our B note, then we have our minor third D, then we have our 5th F sharp, and then we have our flat 7A, and then we can continue that up to B the root, D the minor third, F sharp the 5th, and A the flat 7th. And we can even go down from this root note. I'm starting on the root because it sort of makes the most sense in terms of hearing the chord and hearing the root first. But in this position, we actually have the flat 7th and the 5th below. So if we want to play this full arpeggio across all 6 strings, we would start here on the 2nd fret of the E string. That's our 5th, flat 7, root, minor third, 5th, flat 7, root, minor third, 5th, flat 7. All the notes in this position that fit over a B minor 7 chord. Now the cool thing about this is all of these notes are really going to drive home the sound of that chord because they are the notes of that chord. They perfectly define the sound of that chord. And unlike a scale, you don't have any extra notes in there that can kind of get in the way and muddy things up, right? So there's our B minor 7. Now the real trick to this is tying it together with all the chords. So our E minor, or our E dominant 7 rather, in this position, we have the root right here, right? There's the note E. Then we have our 3rd G sharp, our 5th B, and our flat 7 D, and then root 3rd. And then we have a bunch more below this root note. So there's our flat 7, our 5th, and our 3rd. And we could even play the open E string if we wanted to. Right, so there's a basic arpeggio shape for an E7 in this position. Now the trick is to tie these two together. So when you're first learning this stuff, it's really useful to just play through these. You can just go from top to bottom and get your fingers acquainted with these shapes, right? So B minor 7. To E dominant 7. Right, and this is kind of day one entry-level practicing for working out these 4-note arpeggios. Now let's continue on through the progression to our G major 7. Right here we've got our root note G, our major 3rd B, our 5th D, and our major 7th F sharp. And then we can continue that up by playing the root, 3rd, 5th, major 7, root. So in this position, I actually start, the lowest note in this position would actually be the major 7, F sharp below. So we can play. All right, so now continuing on to the F sharp 7. This is a similar shape. We're just moving down a half step, and instead of the major 7th, we're going to play the flat 7th because that's what's going on in a dominant 7th chord. We have root, major 3rd, 5th, and flat 7th. And we can play that right here with F sharp, the root, A sharp, the major 3rd, C sharp, the 5th, and then E, the flat 7th. And here's the root, 3rd, 5th, flat 7, root. So now, as you're getting acquainted with these, you can just play through them all, and you don't have to worry too much about playing them in time in the beginning. It's more just a matter of getting your fingers acquainted with these positions and getting them sort of burnt into your memory, right? So here's B minor 7. Here's E dominant 7. Here's G major 7. And here's F sharp 7. Right, so now the next step to this is tying them together in time over the backing track or over a chord progression, right? Because the whole idea with this is you want to be able to tie these chord tones together. And as I'll demonstrate as we go through this, it becomes really handy to be able to see the connections between the chord tones and transition between them within your lines. This is kind of a key component to outlining the chord changes in your solos and playing through the chord progression with lines that really define the chords. So one kind of basic way to get started with this is to just play quarter notes, right? We've got one chord per measure. So that's going to be 4 quarter notes per chord. So what we can do is kind of this little voice leading exercise where I'm just going to start with one note of the first arpeggio. I'll start on this B note right here just to keep it simple. And then I'm going to play 1, 2, 3, 4 notes, 4 quarter notes over that B minor 7 chord. And then from there, I'm going to switch gears and start using notes out of the E dominant 7th arpeggio. So from here, I can go down a half step to the 3rd if I want, or I could go up a whole step to the 5th. I could do multiple different ways. There's sort of an infinite amount of variations you can do on this. But basically, the idea is to smoothly transition between the chords. So right, so you can hear how I'm outlining the chords just by using these arpeggio shapes and tying them together. So I'm going to do that example a couple of times over the backing track to give you an example of how I would get started practicing tying these arpeggios together. Okay, so once you get into this, you'll realize there's almost an infinite amount of permutations you can do with this kind of exercise, tying these things together. And it's a really good thing to practice as you're learning these arpeggio patterns because it reinforces the muscle memory and kind of just, getting these shapes really burnt into your memory. But I'll do another one now. We'll take a different portion of the arpeggio. And again, just sticking with quarter notes, we'll transition between the different chords. So you can have an example of a different variation and how it lays out differently under the fingers when you start in a different spot, on a different string, in a different part of the arpeggio shape. All right, so now that we've done quarter notes a couple of different ways, let's change up the rhythm and we'll do eighth notes this time. This is going to give us 8 notes for each chord, right? So now we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then we'll switch gears. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So with this example, we're playing a little bit more of the chord, the arpeggio shape over each chord, right? Fleshing it out a little bit more. And it's going to move a little bit quicker over the track, so it's going to test your memory and knowledge of these shapes a little bit better. All right, so now that we've got sort of the fundamental kind of exercise practice part of this out of the way, we can start to change up the phrasing, and you'll see how this stuff really pays off for coming up with musical examples. And one of the things I like to do with a 4-bar chord progression like this is kind of break it up into 2-bar phrases and come up with a rhythmic motif, and then use the notes in these arpeggios, these chord tones, just kind of plug them into this rhythmic template that I've created. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to keep the rhythm, the phrasing of the rhythm the same for each phrase. It's going to be a 2-bar phrase that happens over the B minor 7 going to the E dominant 7. And then it's going to be rhythmically the exact same 2-bar pattern. But the notes are going to change because I'm going to be using notes from the G major 7 to F dominant 7 arpeggios. And I'll do a similar kind of voice leading thing where I'll play just straight up the arpeggio and then transition to the nearest chord tone as the chord change happens. So now let's do a different permutation. I'm going to keep the rhythmic phrasing motif exactly the same, but I'll start in a different part of the arpeggio shape, and you can see how drastically it changes the fingering and which chord tones I'm targeting. All right, guys, so hopefully this sets you down a path to practicing some new things. If you're wondering how to outline chord changes and get more chord tone type soloing under your fingers, this is really a great method. If you want to do a deeper dive into this stuff, please go check out my Art of Melodic Soloing course. The link will be down in the description. I go into great detail over a bunch of different chord progressions. And if you'd like the tabs and notation for these specific examples and the solo that I played at the beginning, that's all going to be over on my Patreon site. So thank you for watching, and until next time, happy practicing and take care.